Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie said Hong Kong looks to peace and growth under a new roadmap in her annual policy address on Wednesday. She said the city has got back on the right track of one country, two systems. Governance has returned to normal under the protection of Hong Kong SAR's national security law and the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. I just had an exclusive one-on-one interview with the Chief Executive Carrie. She shared with me some of the key points in her policy speech and the highlights of the Hong Kong SAR development plan. Take a listen. Madam Chief Executive, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Yes, it's also my pleasure.
You just delivered your last policy speech in this term as the Hong Kong Chief Executive. What do you think are some of the most important points that others should never miss among those you made during the speech?
Okay. As you have rightly pointed out, Tian Wei, this is my last policy address because the Chief Executive has a 5-year term, and my term will end 30th of June next year. So this annual occasion of the Chief Executive delivering a policy address is my last occasion in this term of office.
Yes.
But I would put it that way. If people want to remember this policy address, I would say and suggest that this is a policy address which is first in many respects. It is the first policy address delivered by the Chief Executive after Hong Kong has returned to stability, right? Right. We have encountered 2 years or more of unprecedented challenges, first with the social unrest, the chaos, the riots, and then a very prolonged period of COVID-19. But through 2 very decisive acts of the central authorities, now we are back on the right track of one country, two systems. One is the enactment and implementation of the national security law. The other is, of course, the improvements to Hong Kong's electoral system.
Right.
As a result of those 2 decisions, we are now really very stable. I would say that we can look forward to a very bright future. So this is the first occasion for a policy address to have that sort of background.
Also unprecedented, in an interview you received recently after the policy address, Madam Chief Executive, you talk about the one country, two systems could well carry over 2047, which is 50 years after Hong Kong's return to China. So what exactly did you mean?
Well, I just want to point out a fact. A fact is since 2019, this one country, two systems policy has been regarded as an institutional strength of our country, right?
Right.
And then on the 1st of July this year, at the celebration of the centennial event of the CPC, again, presidency put a lot of emphasis on the one country, two systems. So in a way, one would easily ask that if that one country, two systems have been such an important part of the People's Republic of China's development, and if it is working well, then why would one want to put an end to it? So I'm just pointing out first a fact. The second thing is, of course, because of the 2 important decisions that I have set, the Hong Kong is now really back on the right track. I would say that it is back on the right track since reunification. So after 24 years of experience with this one country, two systems, we are now back on the right track. And we will continue to be able to contribute to our country's development. So I hope, I do not have any authoritative source to make this statement, but I feel and I hope that this very successful one country, two systems will continue to flourish.
Madam Chief Executive, a lot of people have noticed during your policy address for this term, you've been aligning up Hong Kong's plan very much with that of the central government and the overall development plan of China, the 14th Five-Year Plan, for example. And many pointed out this is almost the very first time Chief Executive of Hong Kong are doing in such intensity in that direction. Madam Chief Executive, tell me more about why you put so much emphasis on that now.
Well, thank you for reminding me that, because I just answered your question. I said this policy address could be remembered as a policy address that is first in several aspects. One is this one country, two systems back on the right track. The other is integrating into the national development. So your observation is correct that in many respects, this policy address is trying to ensure that Hong Kong will integrate better into the national development. But this is not something new. I tried to give a very brief recap of Hong Kong's development in the last 50, 60 years. We have always been benefiting from the national development. We have always adjusted Hong Kong's position in accordance with the national development. So when the People's Republic of China opened up, then we could be the bridge, we could be the connector with the outside world, and we could relocate our industries to the southern part of mainland, benefiting from the reform and opening up policies. But at this point in time, it is important to remind people that Hong Kong's economic development will have to be very closely integrated with the national development. You just look at 8 centers that the central authorities have given us support in the 14th Five-Year Plan. Every of those centers, whether it's International Financial Center, International Trade Center, International Aviation Center, International Innovation and Technology Center, all have a mainland dimension. Why should we forgo an opportunity of doing even better by integrating into the national development?
Madam Chief Executive, a lot of people here, both in China and beyond, are very impressed by your capability of being proactive, explaining to the central government about what's going on in Hong Kong, asking for the best policy for Hong Kong from the central government, and also interacting with the different sectors in China and also different provinces, industries, and also ministries. How do you see your role in that regard? I mean, this is the last policy address for the current term, so I guess it's the right time for me to ask that question.
I think it is fair to say that I put a lot of emphasis on building a working relationship with my mainland counterparts, whether they are in the central ministries or they are at the provincial or city level. So I traveled rather extensively into different parts of the mainland, and of course to Beijing, Guangdong, and Shenzhen, in order to build that sort of not only a working relationship, but a personal relationship, to know the party secretaries, the governors, the mayors, so that we can work together and find opportunities for collaboration. How do I get more support and cooperation from my counterparts? I think that perhaps my mainland counterparts feel that I am a very sincere person, that I really have the national interest and Hong Kong's interest at heart. And because they all support one country, two systems. They all want Hong Kong to flourish under one country, two systems, because this is a national policy at the highest level. So whatever they could do, they could support Hong Kong.
Let's talk about Hong Kong specifically. In your policy address, you talked in depth about the housing problem. And you talk about providing 1 million housing units for the next 20 to 25 years. That's about 35% more than the current number. So that is a grand plan, Madam Chief Executive. But how to implement that? Many would ask that question.
It is true. There are people asking about implementation.
Right.
So that's why in the policy address, I have admitted that in order to be more capable of delivering this grand plan, especially in the northern metropolis, we need to enhance governance. We need to be able to discharge our duties and implement policies more efficiently. So I have suggested a few measures in order to enhance governance. One is we need to have the best structure. So some of the policy bureaus need to be reorganized. For example, I'm sure you love culture, I love culture, but we don't have a cultural ministry. So one of the suggestions is perhaps we should have a dedicated cultural bureau dealing with arts, culture, sports, tourism, just like in the mainland structure. The other is, if housing is so very important, now we are having a policy bureau that looks after two major areas of housing and transport.
Right.
So you can't really put sufficient leadership into each of the two areas. So I suggested we should split them into two bureaus. So that is the first measure, getting the structure right. The other is getting the people right. We have
very crucial.
Be able to attract more capable people who are patriots, first of all, and who are willing to commit to doing this work at the political level. The third measure is to get the right civil servants for the right job. So we will change the promotion and the appointment system to ensure that the best person will go into the job. But it's not just minority.
But you know, Madam Chief Executive, none of the things you just talked about will be implemented today. So many would say this is your last policy address for this term. So you are talking about even 20 to 25 years. That's very long-term plan. Once again, are you confident it will be implemented through various generations of chief executive? That's first thing. Second thing, if not done ASAP, there will be even more pressure for the next few years, whoever the chief executive is, on the housing issue. As you know, it is really the key social issue in Hong Kong for generations.
Actually, if you look at the history, the policies of the Hong Kong SAR government has a very strong continuity. Despite the change in the governance team, that is the chief executive and a political team, the policies will continue to be implemented. I can tell you that right now, I am still executing policies of the previous chief executive, because once that it has been announced as a policy and has the support of the Legislative Council, is welcomed by the people, then every government has to continue to implement it. So I'm not worried about continuity in the policies and implementation. The second thing is about speed. How fast could we implement some of the policies, especially in housing? I have said in the policy address, apart from enhancing the governance that I have just told you, we will fundamentally revamp the statutory and the administrative procedures in building houses, starting from finding land. For example, if we want to reclaim from waters outside Victoria Harbour, there are now several legislations that we have to meet the requirements. Can we not review these legislative requirements to streamline them, to make them more efficient? And then we have other measures like land acquisition. Can we acquire land easier? Then there are issues of clearance. We have to clear some residents. Can we do it faster? Can we improve the compensation arrangements? Can we have more concerted efforts between different departments in order to implement faster? All this will be in the policy agenda to be tackled. And these issues of streamlining procedures will be the first priority. Because without the streamlined procedures, we will just be doing the same thing in the old manner, and that will not meet the requirement of speed. But one good news is, at least for the next 10 years, we have all the land ready. It's longer waiting for reclamation or waiting for acquisition. About 350 hectares of land are ready to be built. So that gives people confidence and hope that as long as we can build fast enough, then the flats will be available either for sale or for allocation as public rental housing.
What about the central government? I mean, I remember there were media reports recently of Mr. Luo Huining, you know, the representative in Hong Kong from the central government, visiting some of the subdivided homes, or some even call it cage homes. And he said in a statement later that his heart sank when he saw the, quote, cramped conditions, and he warned that the property had become the city's main livelihood issue, end of quote. But Madam Chief Executive, as we know, the central government plays a very important role also in Hong Kong, at least in supporting the chief executive. So what exactly is going to be the role of the central government on the housing issue, for example?
Well, let me first say that the liaison office in Hong Kong is the representative of the Central People's Government. And under one country, two systems, the central government has overall jurisdiction of Hong Kong. So it is only legitimate and understandable for representatives of the central government to understand more about Hong Kong, about how the ordinary people in Hong Kong are feeling, and so that they can give advice where needed. But when it comes to actual implementation of policies or provision of solutions to the problems, especially in housing, which is a social issue, which is well within the Hong Kong high degree of autonomy, it has to be undertaken by the Hong Kong SAR government. And under no circumstances have I asked for land from the central government. People have been persuading me, what about getting a piece of land from Shenzhen, getting a piece of land from Zhuhai to build houses? I never contemplated that, because I think we can solve our own problem.
Right.
We could not solve in the past because of the politicization and the tension in society. Now we are in a better position to solve that problem.
Madam Chief Executive, according to the Office of Hong Kong and Macau Affairs from the State Council, following your policy address, it is also issued a statement talking about people in Hong Kong should support the Chief Executive and also bring constructive suggestions and ideas to the policy directions. How do you respond to comments like this coming from the central government?
Well, I am thankful for that sort of support and comments, whether it is from the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office or from the Liaison Office. I noticed the Liaison Office of the Central People's Government in Hong Kong has also made similar comments. But as I see it, what I think they are appreciative of this policy address is the upfront approach that I have taken, that if Hong Kong is to succeed, it has to be on the track of one country, two systems.
You talk about the importance of the latest policy and legislative changes regarding Hong Kong. However, with positive changes as you see it, there might be further pressure from outside exactly because of that for Hong Kong, or whoever will be the Chief Executive for Hong Kong for the next few years. Madam Chief Executive, how do you see that pressure?
I will agree with that, because I believe the China-US tension that we are now seeing will continue for a while. And with that backdrop, then sometimes these external forces will use Hong Kong as a point, or to exploit Hong Kong in order to undermine our country. So that's why I said we have to remain very vigilant. And the second thing is the media. I know you come from the media, but I also have to say that sometimes the Western media is not entirely fair on Hong Kong. They just report on the things that in their eyes are undermining liberty, personal freedoms. And by the way, they have not reported anything on my policy address because they don't find the things that they could attack, maybe. So we have also to enhance our ability to respond, to clarify, and to disseminate the government messages. And that's what I have written in the policy address as a means to enhance governance as well.
Madam Chief Executive, my last question. At the end of your policy address, a lot of people have noticed that you became, very rarely, by the way, a little bit emotional. You thank the central government for the support. You also thank your family for the most difficult days during 2019. I wonder now, Madam Chief Executive, as the first female Chief Executive, as someone who witnessed the dramatic changes taking place in Hong Kong, how would you reflect back upon those days? What does that mean to the Chief Executive of Hong Kong as a qualities?
Those days were extremely difficult. Because I did not know what will happen in the evening, at night, when there are riots and when there are chaotic situations, when the mass transit railway stations are being attacked. I was very worried if there were fatalities, whether amongst the young rioters or amongst my policemen. So actually looking back, I just don't understand how I could go through those days. And it's a very prolonged period, by the way. And that's why I'm really thankful to the central government for giving me this strong support. And they keep on reminding me that whenever the situation is difficult, just remember that the central government is always your strongest support. That's point number one. And point number two is, of course, my own promise to serve the people of Hong Kong. I could walk away, actually. In those days, I could just walk away. I put in my resignation letter, or I said that don't bother me. I don't know how to handle this situation. But because of my pledge that I have made to the Hong Kong people on the 1st of July 2017, that I would always stand by their side. So I sort of persevered and hang on under very difficult circumstances. And still, I have to make very important decisions during the whole period. Mm-hmm. And finally, it's to my family. I have said, and I've told many people, including some media people who interview me, I said, you should not ask me anything about my family, because once you ask me, I would be in tears. So I have to stop here.
And best wishes to your family members as well.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chief Executive, one very, very small and yet last question. Are we going to see you running for the next Chief Executive the next term?
I'm not going to answer that question, Tian Wei.
But I have to ask that. You know that, right?
I look forward to seeing you, either in Beijing or somewhere else.
Looking forward. Madam Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.